Hello, everybody. See some folks still joining in here. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of a housekeeping webinar slide. Good afternoon from Indianapolis. My name is Chris Haugen. I will be your moderator for this session. And I am with Preston Jameson from Ruby Tree Software Inc. And this is the developing an event integration using Sky API. I will be kind of in the background in the backstage here. If you do have any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, please feel free to use those and we can surface those up. Otherwise, I will kick it over to Preston.
All right, thank you so much. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you're having a great BB Dev Days. And so what we're going to talk about today is, of course, developing an event integration using Sky API. And I have a number of objectives I want to cover with this. Number one, I want to tell you a good story if I can. Number two, want to teach you about using Sky API. And then three, I don't want to overwhelm you with code. So there are about 3 slides with pure code, but they're all at the end. So you can get a lot of the out of this presentation, even though if you don't know that much code. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so story time. So we had a prospective customer come to us and about interested in our product called Advancement Form Events, specifically the events module. And they are using Blackbaud NXT. So they wanted to be able to use and integrate advancement form events with Blackbaud NXT. So this is the story of kind of how we built that integration. All right, before we get too much into it, just wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself. So I'm Preston Jameson. I have worked at 2 different universities over 12 years. I oversaw development and advancement services during most of those years, and I founded Ruby Tree Software looking to develop a more customizable online giving and event registration solution. And that product that was created was called Advancement Form. So it does online giving, event registration. We onboarded our first clients in 2013. Since that time, we've processed hundreds of thousands of form submissions, hundreds of thousands of constituents have used the solution, as well as helped our clients raise hundreds of millions of dollars online. Now, what makes Advancement Form a little bit different is that it is an incredibly flexible platform to build your event. So there's many ways to design and run your event. It's easy to register for sophisticated events. So if you're thinking of a reunion where you have, say, 20 or 30 different sub-events or activities taking place during that time, we make it easy to do the registration for those. Thirdly is we're very conversion focused. We really want to maximize the registrations for you. And lastly, next level support. I mean, I know it sounds like a bunch of marketing, but basically, whenever we talk to customers, they say one thing they really love about Advancement Form is the support that we provide. Okay. So getting back to the story, so we had a new prospective customer come to us. They said, we want to make our reunion registrations easier because we need to handle a lot of moving parts that goes on with those events. Secondly, they were looking for an economical solution. Thirdly, they wanted it to integrate with their existing CRM, Blackbaud NXT. And then lastly, they also want to integrate with Blackbaud Merchant Services. So this presentation is about the integration with NXT using the Sky API to transfer events and integrate the events. I am doing a session tomorrow talking about the Blackbaud Merchant Services integration, so you can check that out if you're interested. Okay, so normally when we talk to customers who are interested in using Advancement Form, they say, can you integrate with, and they say their CRM that they're using. And then generally what we do at that point is we look for an API. So we Google looking at the CRM they're using and see what's available. Now it's getting better more recently, but a lot of times if we didn't find an API, we said, well, you can export to CSV, any reports. You can use our GraphQL API to pull the information you need. or we can work with you directly to build a customized export of the data that you want to be able to import into your CRM. But when we got the question from this prospective client saying, can you integrate with Blackbaud NXT? And we looked it up, we said, great, Sky API. Okay, we could use that. So knowing that we had a method to do the integration, we started planning out what that would look like. So do we want to do a one-way integration or bidirectional, send information back and forth between each system? Second, what information are we transferring? Do we just want to say, hey, this person registered to attend the event, or do we want more information? And then thirdly, they indicated we want a matching record interface. We want to be able to look at a record in advancement form and link it up to the exact record in NXT. So when we were discussing the one-way versus bidirectional, well, usually one-way is easier. So that had an advantage with regard to that. And the second point, that NXT was their system of record. And after an event, there's no real need to have information kept up to date in advancement form. So that was kind of another argument to do the one-way integration. And then lastly, it seemed it would be quite difficult to create an event in NXT and then have that create an event in advancement form. The reason is because when you create an event in advancement form, the building of the form actually defines a lot of the fees and how everything gets structured. So we felt it would be a little difficult to take an event in NXT and recreate it in advancement form. Not that it's impossible, but we basically thought it would be an easier path to just do it one way from advancement form to NXT. All right, now then we talked about what should be transferred. And they pretty much wanted to transfer everything. So they wanted to transfer all the event details. This could be, the location that's recorded, the date, start time events. They wanted to create every fee in NXT, all the options, all the participants that attended, as well as the fees recorded for those participants and all the participant options as well. And then in addition, for each sub-event for the larger events like a reunion, they also wanted to record those events as well. And for each of those, record the fees and options and participants of those activities. And then with regard to the matching record interface, after some discussions, this is kind of the flow that we settled on. So one, use the registrant's email address to find constituents in NXT. Now, if the email is not found, then do a search by the registrant's name. And for each of the records found, either by the email or the name, return the name, address, phone numbers, and relationships for those records. Then, through an interactive process, allow the event registrar to pick the NXT record that matches the advancement form registration. And use that relationship information to also match the attendees and participants. So that's why we're pulling the relationship information. And then finally, create records in NXT if no matches are found. So what this would do is if the registrant was not found, it would create a constituent record for that particular registrant. But if it was an attendee that wasn't found, by default, that creates a non-constituent record in NXT. Okay, so that lays the framework of kind of what we plan to build. So now we needed to get access to the Sky API. So I'm going to go over this process of how you access the Sky API. Okay, so first you need to do some prerequisites. Now I am including links in different sections for the different things you need to do. So if you want all the details, I highly suggest using these links and going in and reviewing the detailed steps to do this. So this is basically a high-level overview. So number one, you sign up for a Sky developer account if you haven't already. Two, you need to create an application to be able to start using the API. Three, you sign up for an API subscription, and those are free now. There's a free tier available, or you can sign up for, I think, one of the other tiers that are available with your API subscription. And then lastly, I would recommend connecting the Sky API console, because what that allows you to do is to actually send API calls via the endpoint. So if you literally go to the endpoint reference listed here, you can start testing out the API calls using the Sky API console without having to build anything in your application yet. But once you have that working and you can send some basic calls using the Sky API console, you're ready to build in or get access to the Sky API through your actual third-party application or whatever application it is you're building. So first is to set up your authorization. So, and the link to the docs for that are included here. And this authorization uses OAuth 2. So it uses a first-time user interactive authentication process. And then every step after that requires refresh tokens to keep tokens up to date. And the user that you use to actually do this authentication process is very important, because your user permissions of that user define what in the API can be accessed. The next step is you do need to determine whether your application is considered public or confidential in terms of whether the secrets can be safeguarded. Now, our application is using Ruby on Rails, so everything is on a backend server, so it's considered confidential, so we're using the confidential method. All right, now here's how you actually do an authorization step. And if you look at the link up above, you can see it's confidential application tutorial at the end of that URL. So this is for confidential applications. So the first step that we did is have a button in our system. So if you look at the image on the top right, enable Blackbaud integration, we have this button that they can click within their account, and that enables the Blackbaud integration. Basically, what it does is it reserves a space in our database to store token information, like the actual tokens as well as the expirations. The second thing that you need to do is set up this button to authenticate with Blackbaud, or you can think of this as authorizing with Blackbaud. So what this button is a link to this URL you see here, and you include a query string that includes the client ID, which is from your application, the response code, which is code, your redirect URI, and this is an endpoint in your own application. So what's going to happen is during the authorization process, Blackbaud will contact your server again through this endpoint in your application to pass information you must receive and then do actions on to finish the authorization. And the last thing you need to send is the state. So this is a random hexadecimal string that we created. You can define the state however you want to. We used a random hexadecimal string that gets created new for each authorization request. And I should add, if you are doing a public, not confidential application, you do need to do proof key for code exchange as well. Okay, so when you click on, as the image shows in the lower right, authenticate with Blackbaud, it goes to that URL and you are redirected, or a Blackbaud modal window opens, and you are asked to log into Blackbaud if you haven't already and choose the environment you want to authorize this application for. Now, after you've chosen that, what happens is that while that's happening, Blackbaud sends a request to the redirect URI you specified. So that endpoint will receive a request, and it includes the code and a state parameter. Now, at this point, you need to take that information and send a post request back to Blackbaud. So what we did is you used the state parameter from the request from Blackbaud, and we used it to find that unique authentication request. This is that random hexadecimal that we set for the state. And then once we have found that, we use the code parameter to submit a post request to the token endpoint, which, as you can see here, is this OAuth2 URL/token with the grant type of authorization code. Now, once that post request is sent, you will receive a result, and that result from Blackbaud includes the access token and the refresh token along with the expiration dates. So you would take this and store this presumably in your database so that you can reuse them to access the Sky API. Now, if you look at the top right, the Blackbaud settings, how we reflect this is once process is successfully done, it says Blackbaud authorized, and then you have the victory symbol in the lower right. But this success was short-lived, precisely for 1 hour. Why? Because that is the lifetime of the access token to be able to use the API. So that is the reason for the refresh tokens. So because your access token only lasts an hour, the refresh tokens last a lot longer, and you have to use those to continuously refresh your access tokens. So basically, you send a request to the OAuth2 URL you see here /token with a grant type of refresh token, and you include your token. And that will refresh both the access token and the refresh token. And I think there's an option not to get a new refresh token, but we just replace both tokens every time. Now, you'll have to have a process to refresh these tokens on a regular basis. And what we have done is the second point here. We send a request when the access token has less than 10 minutes left. Now, another way you could do this is you could check for expiration before every API call and refresh the token if it expired. It's basically up to you with regard to implementation. Okay, so that's how you would get access to the Sky API set up within your application. Now let's move forward with actually building the integration that we discussed. Okay, so the integration flow, as we talked about earlier, was going to be one way from advancement form to NXT. So what this means is that you can create your event in advancement form and start collecting registrations right away. And when you're ready, you can enable the integration for the event and start transferring registrations to NXT. Now, we've chosen to actually link each event from advancement form to NXT. So we are not automatically creating every event that's created in advancement form in NXT. That could be an option, but right now it's a separate step to actually link the two events together. So we have this button in our system, like you can see on the top right, that says create an event in Blackbaud. And what that does is it calls the Sky Event API to create the event in NXT. So this is the first snippet of code I think we've seen. And this is basically what the code we built looks like. And we are using a very low-level API that we wrote just to keep things simple for calling the Sky API endpoints. We created a module that we happen to call Blackbaud API. And we have a method called event create. And what we pass in is the customer account as well as the payload. Now, what is the payload? It's basically JSON that includes details of the event you're wanting to create. So the name, the location, the dates that this event is valid for, and it returns a response. Now, as a part of that response, if you look at the third bullet item, it says it receives the event's ID and stores that as an identifier on the event in advancement form. So if you look at the image in the lower right, you can see the event identifier for this particular event that was linked to NXT is 1420. So once that's done, the integration is enabled for this event and different features basically turn on. So with that enabling of the integration, it turns on the matching interface that we set up for this client. Now, when you first start collecting registrations in advancement form, you will see a list of registrations coming in, and the three columns on the right, matches, match actions, and transfer, those are all going to say essentially no matches because we haven't reached out to NXT for anything yet. So when you're collecting registrations, the 3 right columns are basically empty. There's no matches, everything's unmatched. So the first thing you do is you would click the button Get Matches up the top left. That will go out to NXT and do the searches based upon the email and the name to find matches for each registration. And it then stores that information within advancement form so that the matching can take place there. Now, once those matches are pulled over, you can then choose to go in and verify, and we actually advocate doing this, go in and verify each of those matches to ensure that you're matching the correct record in advancement form to the correct record in NXT. Now, if you look here, you can see when Get Matches was run for this, you can see different numbers of matches. So the first line, there were 0 matches, no matches were found for Kyle Red, for example. Whereas most of the others, there was a single match. So presumably this was an email match that it matched on because it just found one record based upon the email. But as you can see, John Smith has 30 matches. Well, that's probably because we did a name match and there are a lot of John Smiths in this particular database. And this is all fake data, of course. But what you'll also notice is that on the transfer column on the right, you'll see matched 1 of 1, 1 of 2, 2 of 2. Those numbers indicate what attendees were matched. So the matching not only does the registrant, but also each attendee that attended a particular event, or you can think of them as participants in terms of the event module in NXT. And once you've gone through and verified, you can start transferring those matches. Now you can transfer one at a time or all of them at once, but basically you click at the top left, the yellow Start Transfer button, and that transfers all the registrations to NXT. And once a registration is successfully transferred, the transfer indicator will turn green essentially and saying, okay, this registration has been transferred as demonstrated by the last line here. Okay, so that's the UI of the interface and how it basically works. Let's see what work is being done under the covers. Okay, so again, the first steps once you have registrations coming in is to get the matches for those registrations. So the first step is for each registration, perform a constituent search using the registration email. So again, we're using our Blackbaud API module, calling the constituent search method, giving the customer account, and we're sending a search string. So you can see in number 1 here, the search text equals email. So this finds records that have that email, returns the response in terms of the match. Now, if you look at number 2, if no matches are found, perform a second constituent search using the registrant's name. So this code is exactly identical to the code above, but it changes the search text to a full name encoded to work within a URL. Once you have all of those matches for each one, then go ahead and get the phones. And again, it's a similar method call. We're just calling constituent phone list and looking for passing in the customer account as well as the constituent ID to bring those phones over. And then we do similarly get the relationships. So we call constituent relationships list, customer account, and the constituent ID. And I'm going to show you exactly what these method calls send a little bit later. That's in the code at the end. But for simplicity of just explaining the process, this is the basic method calls we're making. Okay, so once you have gotten the matches, when you click the verify button, so for example, if we look here under match actions, there's verify, or ones that have already been verified are highlighted in blue. That is what this interface looks like. So on the left, you see the advancement form record. This is just a very simplified one. Didn't even ask for the address for this registration. Whereas on the right, it's pulling all the information from NXT. And what you need to go in and do is then match up the registrant once you match up that registrant, it shows the attendees below it as well. So you can see John Smith and Jane Smith under attendees. Those are the attendees for advancement form, and you need to match those up with relationship records for this particular constituent. Now, you can choose not to choose a relationship and say create new record. That will create a non-constituent record for that individual in NXT based upon this interface. Or you can choose the exact name. Now, you'll also see there's a little hyperlink with the ID. That's the blue next to Mr. John Smith. What that is that opens a link in NXT and brings you to that exact constituent record so that you can examine it in more depth if you are unsure based upon the information provided if it's a good match. So once you've selected what you feel is the appropriate match, you can go ahead and save that. So once you've verified your matches and you're ready to transfer, so you want to hit the yellow transfer button, what happens then? So here are all the different event calls and what happens when that button is clicked. So because we've already created the event, so that already exists in NXT. So then what we want to do is create all the event fees for our fields. So we can store fees on fields. We can also store fees on field choices. So we have to create event fees for both of those. Then we create all the participant options for strings and for lists. So both of those are supported differently in separate method calls. Now, when we were setting I think it was for field choices, which is in our system, that's not a terminology used in NXT. When we were setting up some of these fees, and it may have been some of the lists, we weren't returned unique identifiers for each one. So we had to make separate method calls, separate GET requests to get those unique identifiers, and that's what set field choice identifiers does. And I'll explain why that's important in point 2 here. But I'm showing you just the basic method call, but essentially we're using the same code we used everywhere else. We're going to collect a response where it equals the module Blackbaud API event fee create, and then pass in the account, the event identifier, and submit the payload of what fee we're creating. What is the JSON that needs to be sent to create an accurate fee? And for each of these methods, like creating event fees, basically we find all the event fees in the advancement form event and create separate API calls to create each of those objects in NXT. And for each object created, in point number 2 here, we store that unique identifier in our record. So when we create a fee in NXT, for example, we record the unique identifier of that fee essentially in our object as well. So we have a direct link between each object created. Okay, so after we've set up the events, we go ahead and create the registrations. So for each registration, we create the constituents if necessary. Then we create the participants, those who are coming to the event. We create the fees for the participants, as well as options. And then we also do fees and options when they are at our attendee level. So you can have fees per attendee or fees for the whole registration. So basically we're collecting all of those in these different method calls to transfer all the data advancement form collects to NXT events. And again, this is just a sample method call in terms of creating a constituent. And again, for every object we're creating, even with registrations, we're storing that unique identifier in our record as well. Okay, so, and that was for one event. So what if we're talking about a event with many activities or many sub-events, like a reunion? Well, then now we have to repeat that process for every activity that's taking place as well. Now, how we handled activities in NXT To my knowledge, they don't have nested events, or at least we didn't see a way to do that in the NXT API for the event API. So what we did is we prefixed the name of the actual main event or the umbrella event, prefix that name to each name of each activity when we're creating an event in NXT. But when we go through that process, under number 1 here, we create the activity, we create the event fees for the fields of field choices, participant options, the same thing we did before. And then for each registration of an activity, we create those participants as well as the fees and options for those participants. And we do that for every activity, if it's 10 activities or 20 activities. So all of that information gets passed to or created in NXT. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the code. So we are using Ruby on Rails. So this is Ruby. Hopefully it's more readable than a lot of other programming languages. But this is just our Blackbaud API module. And you can see each of the different method calls. Like number 4, this is how we do a constituent search. Basically, we need to know the customer account and the query string that needs to be sent. So that's what we sent when we're calling this method. And what it does, as you could tell, all of these methods just call connect, the connect method. We pass in the account to that method. We state whether it's going to be a get or a post. So a get is when you're going to look up information. A post is when you're usually trying to create something. There's also delete requests. And then the query string, or the URL that it needs to send to. So this is the actual endpoint that it needs to send information to. So on line 5, you can see this is the constituent v1 constituent search, and including a query string in it. So all of our method calls essentially look exactly like this. This is just a brief snapshot of all the different method calls required to create all of that information. Now, what does the connect method look like? So basically, the connect method accepts the account, whatever action, this is a get, post, etc. The path, this is the endpoint that we're looking at in Sky API, and then an optional payload. So you need to include the payload when you're usually creating objects. So on line 89 and 90, this is basically saying, take the customer's account and find the access token for them. So we're basically getting the access token to talk to the API. On line 92, we're defining what request. We're saying what URI it's going to. We're saying if it's a GET request, send a GET request. If it's post, send a POST request, etc. And this is all simplified, and a lot of code has been removed. I'm just giving you a very basic structure of how we set up our library. And 106 and line 106, we're looking at sending that token for authorization. And then if it is a post request, we also need to send a content type of application JSON. And further, whatever payload we're providing to the API needs to be JSON. Now, when we are building our payloads in our code, it's using Ruby objects. So therefore, we need to convert them to JSON, which in line 109, it just says to JSON. It just converts those objects to JSON. And then this is just a little bit further down in the method. Here is where we are actually making the request. I removed some boilerplate code out of there. But it sends the request and we get the response. And then from that response, we extract a status. Was it successful, or was there a failure of some type? And then what were the results? And the results are usually blank, or for certain searches, the results are blank. Other results, you have to parse the JSON that you receive. And that's what this code does here. Okay, so that's kind of our little mini library we built to handle interacting with the Sky API using events. Now, I haven't shown all of the detail with the code where it's sending all of this different communication, because it would be yeah, definitely more than 100, almost 1,000 lines of code looking through advancement form and sending these requests off to NXT. But in terms of some recommendations, if you're going to be trying to use the Sky API, number one recommendation I would have is definitely build a library, because it helps you, stay dry in your coding. You don't want to repeat yourself too much. And we, again, just had a very low-level API, so you could build a library with much higher level of abstraction, but we just kept it simple. Two, recommendation would be to save every object identifier you create. Now, what that allows us to do is be idempotent, which means we can a user can continuously click transfer registrations, and it will automatically create any objects that haven't been created yet and send any registrations that are ready to be sent. And it also helps greatly with debugging issues. Third recommendation would be to overlog or log more than you think you need, particularly with a multi-step pipeline, like all of these different method calls happening, all these objects being created. It's especially important to know where failure points happened. So again, logging all of those requests definitely helps with debugging. And the fourth recommendation, if you don't have it already, is having some sort of exception tracking, so that if you do have an exception occur, that you will be notified of it and you have details on how to resolve the solution. Because a lot of times we see something pop up in the exception tracker, or at least if this first rolled out, we're like, oh boy, what's going on? And we check it out and we analyze it and we contact this client who's using it and saying, okay, we found this problem, this is the issue. And they're very grateful because they haven't even emailed us yet with saying they had a problem. So those are some recommendations we have. So in terms of the issues, now I know this is very short, but we of course had our own issues with understanding how the system works, understanding the API. This integration has been live for many months. I don't remember any big roadblocks, but one that continuously confounded us or caused issue with us is the issue of string limits. Because sometimes we exceeded those, so we had to put in controls to handle those better, meaning the Sky API didn't accept strings we were sending, some of the strings, as long as we were sending. An example is the event names, because if you remember how we handle multi-event events or multi-activity events, we prefix the main reunion or the main event name before each activity. So that would usually exceed the event limitations of the Sky API. All right. So with that, if you want to learn more about advancement form, we are on the marketplace here, so you can definitely check us out. And I guess at that point, I know I'm done a little bit early, but hopefully we'll have time for questions if people have any. But Christopher, if we could go ahead and launch the survey, that would be great. And then while that's going on, we can handle questions. Okay, so I see one question. Can pre-registered participants do a self-check-in utilizing a QR code? So this is something that's definitely coming in advancement form. It's not available yet. And then the next question was, is this available in our NEX events module? So basically, this integration we built is with NXT events. So generally, you create your event in advancement form, and it will populate all the information in NXT events. Next question I see is, would it be possible to have your email address? Sure. I have a contact. Let me go ahead and But if you want to get in contact with me, I'll put my email address in the chat. But you can contact me via LinkedIn at this address, or you can check out advancedinforum.com. Okay, so that's my email address. Does anyone have any other questions? Or actually, well, if no one has questions, I'll ask some questions. So, what solutions are you building or looking to build with API? Okay, seeing some questions. Marissa, that may just be something that we set. Uh, I can talk with you about it offline. If I mean, it should work in Canada, but there may be particular issues I'll have to look into. So, what are people interested in building with the Sky API? Is this mostly for internal applications, or is this um, something you're building another type of interface for? Okay. Oh, sorry. I did look in the Q&A. Sorry, there are some additional questions here. Let me look here. How do you handle large numbers of API requests at once? Well, so we haven't exceeded any limits contacting the um, Sky API. I guess we're slow enough in sending those requests to create objects. We haven't triggered anything. So we haven't run into any issues yet. This is a question by Alex. Um, so if multiple constituents, so it had a question from Alex. What about multiple constituent record is found matched? So basically, that's the reason for the manual verification. So basically, if more than one constituent pops up, they can manually review it to determine which one they want to be the match. And another reason why we have this link to Blackbaud NXT here, the blue hyperlink, is though sometimes they say, all right, well, I don't see any matches. I'll go ahead and create a record in NXT, do get matches. It will find that match, and now I can match it up accurately. But in the case where there's more than one match, we basically present everything found based upon an email search. And if that doesn't return any results, a name search, and they choose what to match. Yeah, so our constituent matching is we do some matches. So for example, some of the matches we do automatically. Like if we search by an email and only one email is found, that's going to be registered as the match. But the event registrar can always choose to accept that or not. So they can always change it. We're just trying to make it easier for them. And we even match up some of the attendees to say, we think this is the right match. But again, the person who's running the event ultimately determines if it's a good match or not. Okay, interesting, Joseph. All right. So I know I finished definitely early. Any other any other questions about Sky API I can answer? If not, I think we can go ahead and stop the session early. Is that all right, Chris? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. You never know how many people are going to come. So when you see a fair amount of people, that's great. So have a great day and hope BB Dev Days treat you well. Bye.